Lesson number 2, creating a basic animation using effects and presets. So in here, we're going to use Adobe Bridge to preview and import footage items. We'll work with the layers of an imported Adobe Illustrator file. Worked with Photoshop back on the first one. We'll work with Illustrator now. Apply drop shadow and emboss effects. Apply a text animation preset. We'll adjust the time range of a text animation preset. We'll pre-compose some layers. We'll apply a dissolve transition effect. We'll adjust the transparency of a layer. And then lastly, we'll go through and we'll render an animation for broadcast use. So we go through and we begin working with this. We're going to start up just like we did before with our blank document. Now, some people like to go in when they first start off, even with it being untitled, and save it now, do a save as. I don't typically do that. I typically will go ahead and import my footage, and then I'll go ahead and save what is there. Now, we can go ahead and we can browse. So if we click here on File, there is the ability to browse in Bridge. Now, Bridge really is I'll say it's Adobe's file browser, which is what it really allows you to do. But it does allow us to see the content that is there instead of just seeing a simple icon indicating the application or the type of file. It's going to go through and allow us to view them. If you get a warning here just asking about accessing them, go ahead and click on OK. It's going to go through and want to use the standard ones, so downloads, documents. Now when it comes up, it's going to talk about what's available inside of here. What is it that we can see? What is it that we can work with and be able to see? I'm just going to click on Next. It'll go through and look at where you're placing things. And let's just go ahead and close that up. Now once we get inside of here, we do need to go find those files. So like I said before, understanding where it is that you save this at. For me, I know that it's in Downloads. Inside of Downloads, there's the lessons. And then these are the different lesson folders. If I go ahead and double click on lesson 2, it's going to take us into here. We look at assets. These are the files that are in here then as part of our assets. So I can go in here and click on here with the Maui Coast, or I can go in here and click on the blue crab logo. As we go through and we begin to work with it, these are the items that we are going to be using. Now with these, understanding what's inside of here and how we're ultimately going to go in and work with these. This one is going to be a little bit different, mainly because of what is available. The files that are in here for the 2021 book are different than the 2020 book. So we're going to go through and we're going to work with this a little bit differently, and we're going to see what ultimately what we're going to create in here, since, like I said, the 2021 book, I don't have that at this point. But this does allow us to see the files, so we can look over here, this being an Illustrator file, and this ultimately being the Maui Coast file. We're going to go ahead and we want to import these or bring these into After Effects. Now, having this does allow us to go ahead and preview everything that's in here. If we want to see things larger, we can go ahead and we can drag these up. If you're unsure what the files are, you've been given files from a client, we can go in and we can look at them in here. We can adjust things, see what we have for settings. So we start looking at the resolution. So looking at the size. In this case, it's 4,032 pixels by 2596. This is a still image. It also allows us to see the rest of the metadata based upon how it was shot, names, type of the file, when it was created, really anything about it. We can also even go in here and we can add information. So this allows us to get in here if we're looking at who shot the individual image. We can put that in there. Later on in other applications, you'll find that being able to edit that metadata speeds up processes inside of the applications. So once we get inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm not going to jump into there. The other thing, we could double click on it, see if it's going to bring it in. If you have it open, so we went in there, since we went in and said File, Browse in Bridge, it does allow us to double click. You'll see here that when I double clicked on it, that Maui Coast image was brought into our project panel. Be aware as you do some of this stuff, sometimes just based upon the software, it may create a little bit of an issue or close out on you. So we have our Maui Coast inside of here. Well, by bringing that in, you'll notice that what don't we have that we actually need to always be working with? Or as we start to put content together, what do we need to build? So if we import stuff, then what do we need to have to create something? Composition. So in this case, we can go ahead and we can create ourselves a new composition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go out here onto my composition. I'm going to click on New Composition. It's going to pop up our composition settings. Now inside of here, we have our composition name. So we can decide, what do we want to call this? Blue crab. We come down, we start to look at the preset. What do we have for our width? What do we have for our height? And decide what we want to do with this. We're going to go ahead and leave this set just like it is. We're going to come down here to our duration. And let's go ahead and set our duration to 3 seconds. And when I talked before about when we start looking at background color, right there is what it is. So if you start to see that you're having an issue with it, you don't like the black, you can go ahead and you can change that to whatever color you want to change it to. So we're going to set that to 3 seconds, and we're going to click on OK. What are you looking for? So on the composition panel, it just said create new composition. There was a little box. If you don't have that, we can go ahead and go up to composition, new composition, or you can use Command N as the shortcut. Or on your Windows-based machine, it'd be Control N. So then we'll have what pops up. So you're seeing this black. That black's just there indicating, of course, that we have a composition that is available to us. So we're going to grab a hold of that Maui Coast image. Let's drag it down here to our timeline. And we're going to go ahead and drop that in there. Now, once we drop that in there, you're probably going to notice something weird about it. So what do you notice? Do you see all of the image? No. So what happens is it's dropping this image. Remember how large this image was? Any just random guesses? Just ballpark? What's that? So this was 4,000, just a little over 4,000 by like 2,500 pixels. And if you saw when we put it into here, when we created the composition, it was 1280 by 720. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and make this fit inside of here. There's a couple different things that we can do with that. So with our Maui Coast here selected, we need to go ahead and adjust the layer. So if we go up here to our layer, we come down here to transform. We have a few different options down here. So these are just ways to allow us to come in here and begin to work with what is here. So what we have is we have fit to comp. So if we go ahead and we select that, you're going to see that it goes ahead and it adjusts our image to fit inside of the composition. So it went ahead and it scaled this down. So if we look at our Maui Coast in here, we should see a scale right here. Now, when we go through and we work with fit to comp, what do we notice happened to this image? It all fit, but when we look at the numbers under scale, what's that telling us? So we're looking at 31% and 27%, but since those numbers don't match, what has it done? Right, so it went through and adjusted our image. It didn't scale it down proportionally. So in this case, we went through and we did that. We're not set to the same scale. So it's 27.7% of its height. It's 31.7% of its width. Since we are dealing in this case with a landscape, how many people are going to probably come in here and go, you know, that rock should actually be just a little bit taller. So in this situation, we're not going to have an issue with it because there's nothing in here that is going to be recognizable as being squished or squashed. Even if I were to zoom in on just that rock, you're not going to notice what is there. So as you go through and do that, you'll see that it's gone through and placed it on there to allow us to go ahead and put the image into that. So this allows us to go ahead and fit this to the composition that is in here. The other options, if you noticed inside of there, when we look at the transform, is we can also go in there and we have fit to comp width. So in this case, it'll go ahead and squeeze it to fit to the width, or we can fit to comp on height and go ahead and squeeze it in to fit on the comp height. Now you can play around with those and see what happens with those. You're going to find as you start to work with this, though, it's very beneficial to go ahead and be able to play with it. If I went ahead and undid that And we went ahead just to see what they do. So comp width, notice it goes in there. So now it brings it over widthwise. Notice that if we see these lines, that's telling me the image goes outside of there. As you go through to work with it, if you aren't setting on the aspect ratio, you're not set to a certain thing. In this case, we know we're going towards, if we're doing for broadcast, 1080 is the most common that we're going to end up having versus 720. So as we go through to build that, we place it in there. We see what's there. If it's there, it's fine. You know, remember, we can go ahead and if we use our arrow keys, we can nudge this around. Remember, position is always a function that's inside of there. So if we didn't care about not having the extra sky, we can go ahead and nudge this up. So now we're seeing it. Now the rock looks right. We lost a little bit of our sky. If you want to have more sky, we can go ahead and we can adjust it like this, so we're seeing more sky. So those are all options available. Nudge keys are your arrow keys. If you hold down shift, it moves the equivalent of 10 nudges. So it does allow us to go ahead and move this around until you see what you like. Now, the downfall with it is I went through and I used all those nudge keys, so now, of course, it's going to go ahead and I have to undo all of those to bounce through them. Width is going to do the same thing. We'll go ahead and fit it. Or height is going to set it to the height, so it may expand a little bit outside of the boundaries then width-wise, or you may end up with the black bars that come in because of the way that it allows itself or scales itself into there. So as you work with that, find what works best for what it is that you have on that. So now we've gone in, we have that set. I'm going to leave mine just like this. If you have it set just fit to comp, that's perfectly fine too. Notice in this case, there we see, since we didn't do fit to comp, so it's not making both of them fit, we have 31.7 and 31.7. So with that set, now we need to go ahead and we have our file that needs to go in over top of that. That's our blue crab text that is there. So this is currently called blue crab. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now since we haven't saved it yet, it is going to pop up. We need to navigate to where it is that we want to save this at. So I'm going to go into that lesson 2 under the finished project, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a name, and I'm just going to call it blue crab and say save. So now as we begin working with this, we need to go ahead and get in that logo that we have that is the other composition. Don't be confused that we have our blue crab composition here, because remember when we created the composition we called it blue crab, that's why it's down here. So now we want to go ahead and import that file. As I said, I'm going to go and double click in my project panel so this pops up. I have a blue crab logo.ai file. Now once we have this selected, we don't want to have footage, we want to go ahead and choose composition. And then we're going to say open. If you're working on other devices, PCs, that probably is going to say import. So just get used to what's there, understanding the functions as we go through. Now once we go through and we do that, it went ahead and we brought that in as a composition. So we have a blue crab and we have our blue crab logo. So if we click on those, we can see what is there. So what I'm going to go do is I want to go ahead and bring this logo into my composition that's down here via the timeline. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle close the disclosure arrow where I showed out the percentage. I'm going to bring it down and we're going to make sure it's on top. Remember, we want it on top because it's our stacking order. We're making the sandwich. We don't want the cheese laying on the counter while we put a piece of bread over top of it. So we're going to go ahead and grab a hold of that blue crab logo. We're going to bring it down here until we see that blue bar above where we have our Maui coast. And we're going to drop it in there. So now that we have our blue crab charters, so there's our blue crab logo. You should see both of those items. If for some reason you brought it in and it's below your Maui coast, go ahead and just drag that up above it so we can see what is there. So now we went ahead and we brought in our blue crab logo. If we double click on that composition, just like we had with our Photoshop, what we have here is we have our different layers that are inside of Illustrator. So we see that we have our text, we have our crab, and we have our background that are here. We're going to add ourselves in some text. So we have Blue Crab charters. We can decide what do we want to do with this individual logo that is here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this logo. We're going to adjust the placement of where our Blue Crab charter is at in our main item here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this up here. So I'm going to jump back over just to the Blue Crab. Not to confuse you, I know Blue Crab and Blue Crab logo. Sorry. So we're going to go ahead and put this Blue Crab charters up here in the upper left. And then I want to jump back over to the Blue Crab logo, decide what is it that we're going to do with this. We want to add a little bit of text to this. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to come in here and adjust what we have for our item. Now we have text inside of here. If I double click on any of these layers inside of here, because you will do this at some point, it will confuse you. If you double click on these, what's going to happen is you're going to see just the layer up here. No, you haven't lost anything. No, you didn't accidentally delete something. Up here at the top, you're going to see we have a composition and we have a layer. If you simply click on that X, it will take you right back to where you were anyways. For our text that's down here, if we start to deal with our layer, you'll see in here we can create shapes from vector layers. We can go ahead for any of these. We can create shapes from them. So if you go in and you start to work with a vector layer, we can go ahead and we can add those into it. But what we want to work with, we want to add some text to our Blue Crab charters here. Can't keep sitting, I'm getting a cramp in my leg. So we're going to go ahead and work with what we have in here. These are layers. We can adjust these layers. But in this case, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to add text to what we have on here. I know there's a little bit of adjustments inside of your book that does things a little bit differently. So bear with me how we work our way through this today. So as we start to work with this, we want to add some text in here. In this case, we want to go ahead and look at the text from the standpoint to be able to animate text using presets. So let's go ahead and grab our horizontal type tool. And I'm going to come out here, I'm just going to go ahead and click inside of the composition. Now once I click inside of this composition, what's going to happen is we're going to have our text pop up there. If I go ahead and type in, it's going to add some text to this. In this case, mine just simply says Fish Maui. So we're going to have some text that is created inside of here. Now, as we start to work with our text, how do we go about changing the colors? Well, over here on the right side, we have our eyedropper. If I go ahead and I select the eyedropper, what? That's interesting. I'm going to come over here and go ahead and I can select any of these colors using that eyedropper, which will allow us to go ahead and choose a color that exists inside of, in this case, our logo. If you want to work with this elsewhere, if we wanted to, we could also do this whole thing inside of the Blue Crab charters. Now, the other thing we can also do is we can animate individual pieces inside of here. So if I go in here and I have Fish Maui, and if I wanted to make that larger, I could make that larger. We can change the positioning of it. In this case, I can change the color if I don't like the way that comes out. I want to go something else. If we position this down here. So this allows us to go in and work with what's here. And I'm still trying to figure out what color I want to work with. Let's do that. And then trying to figure out a good stroke color that, actually I don't, I'm just going to use the yellow if I can get it. So we're gonna create what is inside of here as we go through and we add some text to this. The main reason why I'm going to put the text on here so that we can go through and we can see some effects that start to happen on this as we go through and build it. Now what we'll also find if we go back over here into our Blue Crab logo is that we do have these different layers. As I said, if you double click on them, you can see exactly what the focus is on these individual layers. There are other effects that we can apply to those, since those are individual things that are inside of here. What animation preset do they have being applied? If you don't mind pulling it up. Pretty sure if I remember right, they're going to add something to the crab which allows it to move. I'm on to wiggles because I'm starting to think about what goes into them. Okay, so I'll just, so let's do this. I'm gonna jump back 1 second here. Let's go, I'm gonna jump into the Blue Crab, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just delete that text layer. And let's go into our Blue Crab logo, and now we'll just add, let's go ahead and add our text into here, and I know what they want us to do with this, so explore Hawaii. Let's adjust the size on that. Yeah. And you make this look however you want. You can choose whatever text you want to choose. So we'll do something about like this. And then if I jump back over into the main composition, what we're going to see inside of here then is this. I'm going to go and just place this right here in the center of the composition. So it allows us to go in and add our text inside of here. So if we, does everybody get their text added to it okay? Okay, so we're going to go into here. What we're going to do is we have our Explore Hawaii inside of here. Let's go ahead and we're going to take this text that's here and we're going to add to it then the ability to go in and create ourselves a simple little drop shadow on this area. So let's go ahead and we're going to select, actually we'll do it on the whole thing. So let's jump over to our Blue Crab, make sure that we have the Blue Crab logo composition selected here. And with this selected, we're going to go ahead and add ourselves an effect in here. So effect perspective, and we're going to do ourselves a drop shadow. Now what's going to happen with this is it's going to automatically add that drop shadow based upon everything that is on that individual composition. So the text that we went in and keyed in and also the logo that is there as well. Now we go and we add the drop shadow. Since it is an effect, you will see the drop shadow up here. This allows us to control everything about it, distance, softness, what's going on with the shadow. If you look closely, you're going to see this harsh shadow that's on there. We're going to go ahead and soften that up a little bit. So if we go ahead and go to softness and we start to increase that, you're going to see that the shadow gets a lot softer. The other thing we can do is we can increase our distance. So you'll see how the shadow goes away from it. So we can adjust how much of that shadow we want, how far do we want it to actually be offset. I just bumped that up to 22 with a distance, our distance of 16 with a softness of 22, so we can see the shadow coming on there. It's going to help offset that from what is there behind it. If you want to, you can change the color. So we can come in here, we can choose a shadow color. If you wanted to work with a color that is part of what is here, we could always come out here and select something else. So we could make the shadow be a color based upon what is there. Or we can, of course, keep it on black. If you don't want black, we can go ahead and we can go to white. So essentially it gives you that highlight piece. All these things we can go ahead and we can control what is inside of there. So we can go ahead and adjust what we have for our softness and our distance. You're going to find there isn't any set numbers that are in there that you have to work on. You're going for a look. As we go through and begin to use this, you're going to see that you're going to look at it, what works, what doesn't work, what you like, what you don't like. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to set that into there. Now we're going to go back over to our Blue Crab logo. We're going to go ahead and take our text that's here. We're going to apply ourselves a preset to this. Now remember we talked about the effects and we dealt with text. So if we come in here to animation presets, we're going to see there is one called text. When you toggle that text open, these are all the different ones that actually go in and you can work with. So it's what exactly do you want to go ahead and have this stuff do. You don't have to do the same stuff. When they went in to work with it, they went in and they're dealing with blurs. So in the blurs, they're going to come in here and they use bullet train on the one that was in the one that I'm in. So you can use bullet train, which will make it come in. You can do blurs by word. You can do foggy, jiggy as they move. What I would tell you is to go, feel free to grab any of these and use them. If I bring bullet train out here and I drop it on here, remember it's going to apply it based upon where we're currently at. So when I drop it on there, we're at the beginning. We don't have our text on there. If I simply scrub across, I can see then my text showing up. In this case, showing up saying explore Hawaii. So this is all in here. It allows it to come in letter by letter as we go through and work, and then it'll stay the same throughout the rest of those 3 seconds. Now we go through and we start to work with things. We may decide that we want to go ahead and take information and actually pre-compose it so that it's already built and go instead of waiting for it to happen inside of our blue crab. So if I come over to the blue crab, you will see it's still there. It's going to still do the same thing. But if we go over into our blue crab logo, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pre-compose what is here, which then is going to allow us to apply different settings to this in the other areas. So let's go ahead and take this layer that we have here. So we want to go ahead and we want to pre-compose the layer that all of the stuff that's inside of here together. So let's go ahead and jump over to our blue crab. And we're going to go ahead and pre-compose all of this into one setting. So if we go ahead and take this, we can go ahead and actually I don't want to do that with just the crab logo. Let's go ahead and do layer, and then we want to go ahead and pre-compose this all the way down at the bottom. So we're going to have this set. We're going to tell it to pre-compose this into logo comp 1. So it's going to go ahead and now pre-compose this into this setting. Now once we go ahead and have this set, let's go in here and add ourselves some adjustments to our logo itself. So we have this set. If we go ahead and we were to play this, it's going to bring itself in. And then we can take, in this case, we have this comp that's here. Let's just go ahead and add ourselves transparency. And the shortcut for transparency is T. But we want to apply this out at the 2-second and 24 frame. And all we're going to do is we're going to drop this opacity down just a little bit. So we want to take this out here. It's at 100%. When we go through and we start working with our keyframes, always remember, we need to have a keyframe recorded before we do anything. Else what's going to happen is it's going to be essentially a global change. So that change is going to occur across the entire thing. So if I change the opacity right now at this to 80%, it's going to be 80% the whole time. If I want it to be full opacity at this point and then just fade out a little bit, so if you think about when it comes up and then it fades out, just so you know what TV station you're watching. So, but when it first comes on, it's usually full opacity and then it drops out enough so it's not distracting to you. So we're going to go ahead and bring up our opacity shortcut of T. We're going to go ahead and toggle on the stopwatch. It creates a keyframe for us out here. And then we're just going to go ahead and hit to end. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply change that opacity then from 100%, and let's drop it down to, I'm just going to soften this up. So we'll just drop it to 80% so we can see it apply the effect over there. So as we go through, we look at that. It's going to soften itself down. Another thing you can also do is how you can go through and fade things out over a set period of time. Now, as we go through and start to work with this, if I go ahead and go back to home and I hit the space bar, we can watch, there's the Explorer Y. It comes in, and it's going to fade itself down. Now, I do have it on looping, so that's why you see it jumping back and forth or going all the way around. If we go ahead and we take this off and we look at preview and I have it stop, you'll see then it's going to play through. Then you'll see what it looks like at the end clip. So let me just jump to... So that's what it looks like at the end. Now, once we go through and create it, everybody get that to create okay? Again, things are going to be a little bit off on here since, again, this is a little different than the other one. I could have pulled up the previous version to work through. Hopefully, we'll have the other book by the time we get to next week. So now we have everything set. We're happy with what we have on here. We have our blue crab. We need to go in and ultimately render out what we have here. So we have this set. We want to render out this item. So we need to actually go through and add this to the render queue. So if we go ahead and we jump over to our project panel. So if we come up here, if you're seeing effects and you can't see the project panel tab, the double arrows over here, if you click on that, will allow us to go ahead and choose project. And you'll see that we have then our blue crab. This is the composition that we went through and created. We know it because it's down here. What we need to do is we need to go ahead and take that. We need to add this into the render queue. So with this selected, blue crab, we're going to go over here to our composition. And we want to go ahead and it says right here, add to render queue. Don't do add to media encoder queue. That's going to do something entirely different. So we're going to go ahead and say add to render queue. It's going to open us up a panel down here. You'll notice it's nested in with our timeline. This allows us to choose what are our settings. Anything that's blue allows us to change something. So in our render settings, if we toggle that down, you'll see this is what it's currently set at. If you click on best settings, it's going to give us a lot of different options. I will just warn you as you go in here, we'll start working with a lot of different things. Different codecs as to what we're going to render it out as, whether we're looking at MP4s, we're looking at MOVs, AVIs, things along those lines. I'm just going to click cancel on that. We look at our output module. We look in here for lossless. This is where we're going to come in here. Format by default, it says is QuickTime. These are format options down here for the audio. When we go through and we start to output, the big thing to make sure is that if we run it and something doesn't work outright, there's a major thing that we're going to come back to, and you'll mess it up at some point. We'll just redo it. Right here, when it talks about what is it that you're going to go in and render out, there's work area, there's length of comp. If you have a certain area selected, which is your work area, it is only going to render that. So get used to having to come in here and say time span, length of comp. Now, we didn't change our work area. We haven't done anything with work areas yet, but that's the thing that happens. Sometimes people get in there and all of a sudden, even though you're previewing it, if you set your work area, it's only one frame and you try to render out a movie, guess what? It's going to tell you it can't do it. Cannot render. Cannot render. Not enough frames. Cannot render. And you're going to wonder what's going on. That's usually why the problem ends up being, is because your time span is set just to work area, not the length of comp. If you render something out and you're like, why isn't it 30 seconds? I made it 30 seconds. Once again, check to make sure that you're not just rendering work area and that you're actually going in and rendering out the length of the comp. So that's the one thing just to check on. We're going to say okay. The other thing is asking, where are we going to output it to? See, it says not yet specified. We haven't told it where to save this. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And then it's going to allow us to, where do we want to save this to? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and go back into lessons 2. And I'm going to come in here and we'll go ahead and I'll put it as part of my finished project. It's going to be bluecrab.mov. It's a file format we had set. That's what we told it to work with in there, because remember we chose QuickTime that was up there. And we're going to go ahead and say save. Now all it did was just tell me where I was saving it to. So now if we look over here, we see our render settings. If we toggle this down, our output module is lossless. It's outputting it to bluecrab.mov. It's a QuickTime. Output info is listed as animation, no post-render action. Later on, we will start to get into here. Things that you can do is we can actually import and replace, which means we can render something out and it'll automatically come in and replace that composition with that file. So it'll be a footage file. And with it going out to, there it is on our bluecrab.mov. Other settings that we'll look at as we start dealing a bit more with our rendering is making sure that as we render, if you get only video, no audio. There are settings in there when we're working with audio. You can actually turn off the audio. Make sure both those are selected as we render it. Once we are done and we're happy with it, up here on the right, you're going to see this render button. Once you click on the render button, it's going to go through and render. Once it's done, if you have the audio on, right now my audio is muted. Usually it gives a little ding. Once that dings, you can then go through and find your file. So in this case, we're on finished project. There's that bluecrab MOV. I unmute this. Actually, there's no audio with this, so why does it matter? If I go ahead and double click on that, why is it not compatible? It's a QuickTime movie. All right, well, we're going to choose something else to render this out. So with that, if you have an error, you can't just simply come back into where you last rendered it. Notice that these settings no longer allow us to actually do anything with that. We do have to go back up here to our blue crab, and we actually need to go ahead and take this, and we need to take this and ultimately go back in and re-add this composition to the render queue. So composition, add to render queue, and then I can come in here, I can change some settings. That's full. Let me choose, let's see, we're on 30. Some of these are going to be really large. So we'll do DVC Pro 7, no, this one. I know there's going to be a settings mismatch. That's fine. Let's render this. Let's see if this one will play. All right, we'll have to figure out what's going on, why it won't play that out. And I don't have anything else on here right now that's going to play that. But that's how we go through and render. We'll look at the render settings and figure out I'll figure out why it's coming up that way, and why it's not going to play it out. But that allows us to go in. That's how you're ultimately going to go in and render out your videos.